So what exactly do everyday Americans stand to lose or gain, and why is this unpopular bill so essential to this administration? Douglas Holtz-Eakin is president of the America Action Forum, having served as chief economist to President George W. Bush, and Jared Bernstein chaired President Biden's Council of Economic Affairs. They join me now. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me start with you, Doug, because if we were to take the CBO's projections of $3.3 trillion adding to the deficit over a 10-year period of time, do you believe what the administration is saying, that the economic stimulus from the tax cuts would offset this burden to the deficit? Or are we at risk for long-term fiscal instability, as many of its vocal opponents argue?
Well, I certainly think it's closer to the latter. We're already in a dangerous fiscal position. This makes it worse. I look at this bill and I don't see much in the way of stimulus and pro-growth policy. There are some business investment provisions for expensing equipment investment, research and development costs, and some structures, but that's about it. The rest is extension of current law, which gives you nothing, and a whole bunch of political favors and handouts to particular classes. Not much there in the way of pro-growth tax policy.
Jared, your successor, the CEA Chair Stephen Moran, just this morning said that this bill will cause an investment boom and more reshoring, as well as lowering the deficit, as the administration has been saying all along. He also says that the CBO ignores a number of things, including the better growth in this bill for the economy, investments in new factories, that it completely ignores tariff revenue, which they claim will bring in $3 trillion over the next decade. And then he goes on to include deregulation, $1.5 trillion from DOGE cuts, and what he says will ultimately lead to $8.5 to $11 trillion in deficit reduction over the next decade. Just if you want to rebut those claims, now you have the floor.
Thank you. The only people who believe, or who will even make an argument that this bill is going to reduce the deficit or the debt, are people who are being paid to believe that. Every estimate I've seen, and I've looked at nonpartisan, left, right, I don't care who it's from, has been very clear that this bill will increase our deficit and debt. And in fact, I saw a nonpartisan estimate this morning of the Senate bill taking our debt ratio, our debt as a share of GDP, to about 130% 10 years from now. Now that's a lot higher than it was even in World War II, when our debt ratio topped out at 110%. And you have to ask yourself, for what? Why are we willing to accept, or why, I shouldn't say we, because you mentioned how unpopular it is, why are Senate Republicans and the president endorsing a level of debt that is beyond that of when we were fighting fascism? What are we getting for this? A bunch of transfers from low-income people, from their Medicaid and their nutritional support to the wealthiest through a set of tax cuts, which we just don't even need right now. So that is very misleading rhetoric from my predecessor.
It is objectively one of the most regressive pieces of legislation that we've seen. And Doug, the Yale Budget Lab estimates that the richest 20% would receive an average of $6,000 in tax cuts, while the bottom 20% would lose $560 per year under this bill. Is there any economic rationale for why it is broken up this way? And what are you hearing from Republicans who are concerned about this very issue?
Well, I think Republicans who are concerned about this issue recognize this is an extraordinary missed opportunity on two fronts. I mean, front number one is obviously the fiscal outlook, which was in a terrible shape when the Trump administration came into office, and now will be worse. This is going to have negative implications for every American and puts us at risk. The second missed opportunity is to build on the 17 Act's better parts of pro-growth tax policy and actually raise the trend growth rate in the United States. You know, back when we took care of business on the fiscal front in the 20th century, the standard of living doubled roughly every 30 years. Now it's on track to double every 56 years. So people can see their access to the American dream slipping away. Better economic growth is the solution to that for everyone. You don't have to pick winners and losers. Everyone is better off. And this is a real miss on that front.
Jared, assuming there aren't significant changes here in the House, ultimately there will be some to put up a fight. But given that this is a signature piece of domestic legislation for this president, I think it's safe to assume that in one way, shape, or form, closer to where it is now, it will be signed by the president in the coming days. Can you talk about what that does for the legislation that you helped pass and put forward under the Biden administration, which we should note was passed in a bipartisan manner? I'm specifically referencing Build Back Better.
Yeah, one of the things in this bill that we're hearing a lot of complaints about, and I'm talking about the Chamber of Commerce, Elon Musk, as you mentioned earlier, is the extent to which they are not just cutting back investments in renewable energy, which not only produces less costly energy, we're going to need a lot more electricity in this country, especially if we want to lead in artificial intelligence. But they also have buried in here an actual tax, a new tax on the production of renewable energy in this country. So it doesn't just take away what President Biden added in terms of contributing to the production that we're going to need to be globally competitive in the future. It actually taxes the creation of renewable energy sources. This is clearly misguided. And again, the president and the Republicans are hearing from their constituents, from the Chamber of Commerce, that this is just a big overreach in that regard.
Yeah, you've seen a number of oil and gas sector companies. You've seen a number of red states really express alarm over this as well, because that's where they've invested a significant amount of resources over the last several years and are seeing real profit in terms of renewable and green energy and solar power as well. We're talking about states like Texas, not necessarily even California here, which has also been benefiting from that. Doug, the president was asked in Florida just moments ago about what has always been viewed as the holy grail, and that is entitlement programs really taking a beating here. Medicaid specifically, as the CBO estimated that over 10 million people could lose their health care, some 8 million people losing Medicaid alone. The president said, no, it'll be much lower than that because according to the president and his advisors, the focus here is just cutting back on waste, fraud, and abuse. So walk us through the numbers and the reality here.
Well, I think the reality on the Medicaid reforms is that the focus is on so-called provider taxes, which are a financial gimmick used by states to pull money out of the federal taxpayer and into the states. And in a more sane environment, I think both sides could get together and put an end to this gimmick. The Medicaid program itself could be refocused and reformed in a sensible fashion. Just pushing at this one piece in isolation doesn't do much good. I think the larger issue is that nobody's taking on the entitlements. The president puts Social Security and Medicare off limits. Those two programs alone are more than 1/2 of all non-interest spending over the next 10 years. They're growing more rapidly than the rest of the budget. They are the source of a structural deficit that's getting larger and threatening our financial future. So a serious effort at fiscal reform includes entitlements, doesn't take them off the table.
So what would you have supported, Doug, in this regard? Because we've seen a significant investment also in defense spending, in border security as well, and however you want to describe it, whether it's cuts to waste, fraud, and abuse or not, we are going to see Americans lose their health care. Americans that need it.
I think the gold standard here is would have been a deficit-neutral, pro-growth reform run off a current law baseline. That would have addressed the missing pieces of the 2017 Act, where I thought, for example, the taxation of pass-through entities was not very good, very complicated, not very helpful. That could have been reformed. It would have made progress on the fiscal front, and you wouldn't have, in isolation, gone after a low-income health care program as the only source of offsets. So, they just missed the mark on all fronts here, and the result is a bill that's pretty incoherent in the end.